and I'm the current CEO of IPAF. Today, I think we've got a very important topic, and we've got the full board of IPAF on board to answer questions, and we're going to jump straight in. I'm going to introduce our speaker, who is very well known to all of us, and long CV, but I'm going to try to summarize it. Let me put my video on as well. So today's topic for POPIA is going to be on family practitioners' minimum requirements. And I think Tony's going to try to, simplify it and make it as easy as possible, because it's the one most complicated topic at the moment. And I think the more webinars we attend, the more confused we get. So Tony, I think, is going to assist us. Dr. Berman's going to assist us to make sure that as practitioners in our practice, we have a clear understanding of what we need to do. So Dr. Tony Berman graduated in 1975 from the University of Cape Town. He trained at Grooteskier and the Red Cross Children's Hospital, and following a compulsory military service, entered private practice, where he ran a successful 3-person practice for over 20 years. He then moved into medical business consulting and network development, which he still does up until today. In 1998, he joined MPS, the Medical Protection Society, and after a break in 2012 to 2017, he rejoined MPS again in September 2018. Dr. Berman is a fellow of the Faculty of Forensics and Legal Medicine at the Royal College of Physicians in the UK, London. He is widely versed in South African medical, legal, political matters, supports and guides doctors and related professionals in South Africa, as well as advises MPS in the UK and South Africa on medical business matters. Dr. Berman writes for MPS and gives talks on various medical legal topics, and is involved in the delivery of MPS risk management and education in South Africa. I think most importantly, besides the MPS work, Dr. Berman is the previous CEO of IPAF, and also has had a long role in GP leadership in South Africa. Dr. Berman, over to you. And before I start, Dr. Berman, I just want to ask Prof. Chetty to just say a few words before we go into the lecture. Prof?
And there's not much I can say. I think you've covered that. I think it's, as you said, the queries that we're having is that each different webinar is like more complex, and people come back from these webinars very much more confused. And so what we've asked Tony to do is, as you said, make this as simple as possible. And that's why we've gone to the extra bit of having to give a handout and to Tony to do his talk, so that we have something concrete in front of us, which is tangible, and we can help understand it. I'm not saying that this is the only webinar we're going to have on the POPIA Act. We're probably going to gauge the kind of responses we get, and then between Anbin, I, and Tony and the board, we will think about having a follow-up if necessary. So Anbin, back to you, and let's have a good evening.
Thank you, Prof. Tony, we're going to jump straight into it. I'm going to ask you to please start.
Super, Ben. So initially, I'd just like to find out, has Olivia said hello yet, or are we at the very beginning? Because I've literally just managed to log back on using a different network. At the start?
Hi, Tony. I am online.
Okay, super. So we can get going. Guys, it's a fantastic occasion to come to our family practitioners, although this talk is welcome to everybody. I think what has happened up to now is, as Morgan and Anbin have pointed out, we've been assailed by huge amounts of information, all of it correct, and much of it a little bit of an overload. I've been asked repeatedly, can't we just have a tick chart? Can't we just have a shortcut? This is as close to a shortcut tonight as we can possibly get. And I think that the lecture will probably hit the mark. I've given the same lecture to about 3,900 practitioners around the country by now. And I think what you'll take away from this today is a whole lot of ease of application of what you need to know. Don't get involved in stuff that you don't need to know. Don't look for problems. Just look for where you can possibly comply. We've all had blackouts. We've had droughts down here in the Western Cape. We've had floods in various parts of the country. In Gauteng and KZN, you had insurrection and looting. So I know that none of us are particularly in the mood for a dry kind of a talk on POPIA, especially with COVID in our third wave and just coming out the other side. So I'm going to try and give you a layman's talk. I'm not a lawyer. I don't purport to be a lawyer. I've done this literally with the tutorship of a guy called Hickley Hammond from Clyde & Co, who showed me what there was to know on the POPIA Act. And I've perfected a lot of the stuff which I know by reading around the Act as well. So I hope that you enjoy it. My disclaimers, I think you've heard, I work for MPS, I work for IPAF, and I run an IPA in the Western Cape called Quality. So with all of those aside, my aim tonight is to make sure that you achieve just 51% of a compliance audit, should you ever have a compliance audit from a regulator. That's all that you really need to know. No one asked you when you qualified and put up your brass plate, did you get a third, an upper second, a lower second, a cum laude, or a first? It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference tonight. So long as you can understand what I'm showing you, the rationale behind what we're doing is actually patient safety. And that falls fairly and squarely into the basket of the IPAF Foundation, its chairman, Professor Chetty, and its chief executive, Anvin Pillay. I've got to say a big thank you to the MPS, and with that I'd like to just introduce our lady called Olivia Parbonat. And Olivia is going to tell you a little bit about what she does and what is the MPS's mission tonight. Olivia, over to you, our Business Development Executive.
Thank you, Tony, and good evening to everybody. It's so nice to see so many on the session. Yeah, I thought Tony thought it would be a good idea just to do a quick introduction. And before we get into the session with Tony, just to introduce myself, I'm Olivia Parbonat, and I'm the Relationship Manager for Medical Protection Society, specifically for the Western and the Eastern Cape. Now, if you remember of MPS, I probably spoke to you at some time or the other, so now you can put a face to the name. So as you would probably know, MPS has been protecting and defending members in South Africa for just over 60 years. We're not for profit and also a mutual organization, and our members can approach us at any time for a variety of requests for assistance, be it complaints or claims, regulatory matters, disciplinary proceedings, inquests, just to name but a few. Now at MPS, our philosophy is really to support safe practice, obviously helping you to avoid it in the first place through appropriate risk management and prevention interventions. And this is one such intervention. With the advent of POPIA in South Africa, from an MPS perspective, we've been fielding and receiving a lot of questions around the topic from different healthcare professionals. So in collaboration with the IPA Foundation, MPS would like to offer this in terms of providing some clarification, some insight, and as Tony alluded to, some guidance for compliance with POPIA. So I trust that you will find it of some benefit and value. And then just before I hand over to Dr. Berman, I'd just like to invite you to reach out to me if you ever have any questions regarding your individual membership or even indemnity for your practice. I'm not sure if I can, but I'll try and drop my details in the chat shortly, or if not, you can still get it from Tony. So without further ado, over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Super. So the structure for tonight really is to kind of complement the handout. So I hope that most of you have received the handout. If you haven't, please just let us know. The KZN officers of the IPA Foundation will make sure that you do get the handout. And the handout complements the talk, and the talk complements the handout. But it'll give you something to just hang your hat on. The first 7 pages of the handout are our suggested forms. You're entitled to change the wording as much as you want. And we're not giving you these to you as legal documents. These documents are for you to have a look at and see whether you think that they fit into your practice. But it's just a formulation of thinking. It's a way of getting through this rather complicated act in as a brief interaction as you possibly can. The last 7 pages I'll talk to you towards the end of the talk, but it is a reproduction of the old POPIA Act, that is the Promotion of Access to Information Act 2 of 2000, and we use that to populate our POPIA folder, which is the goal of tonight. At the end of tonight, you'll be able to take all these forms, put them together for your specific practice, different questions, etc. in it, and you will then have a folder which you can keep at the behest of your clients, of your staff and yourself, should you have an inspection from a regulator. That's the goal, to make sure that you are fully empowered to withstand a regulatory inspection and to come out with flying colors. We're going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we've got about 20 minutes of the implementation of the whole thing. We will take some questions. I do have another talk which is coming up at around about 8:15, but we'll try and do as much as we possibly can tonight. So we're going to touch on things like security, consent, staff training, data breaches, contracts with operators, the alignment of POPIA and your PIA manual, and then the registration with the information regulator. And remember, your old
Emily, come and help.
I wonder if everyone could maybe mute their mics. And I doubt whether I can help this one. Your old PIA manual is no longer what we need. We actually need that to merge into a POPIA folder. So the key definitions. Let's get this behind us very quickly. They're easy. The data subject is your patient. So instead of consumers of health, which they've been labeled as by the National Health Act, they are now called data subjects. The responsible party is you, and you will almost certainly be your information officer as well, but I'll come to that a little bit later on. Then the operators, that's the definition of an operator. It's a third party who processes personal information in terms of contract with you. And I'll explain this in a bit more detail, because it's not as simple as it seems. Simple is the final one, which I think every one of you knows. It's consent. Now, we don't have to tell you that it's informed, it's specific, it's voluntary, and it's actually an expression of will for the patient to actually give you the authorization to process their personal information. That is this consent. It has nothing to do with what you intend to do, examine, remove, insert. It doesn't make any difference. This is just to gather the information. Now, normally, people are not allowed to process personal information. Since the 1st of July 2020, implemented in 2021, the processing of personal information is not permitted. And this includes stuff like biometric information, sex life. Once again, can I ask whoever's got their mic on live, please, will you all mute your microphones? Because we are hearing people unwrapping sandwiches, talking to children, and it's very, very distracting for everyone trying to listen to what we're trying to say. As far as your health conditions are concerned as well, that is all special personal information. It's your race, it's your ethnic origin, etc. These are not able to be processed any longer. Now, there's an exception, and that exception is Section 32. And Section 32 of POPIA actually says medical, dental, and other healthcare professionals, as well as a whole bunch of others, social services, medical schemes, administrators, MCOs, etc., they are entitled to process patient personal information, provided that the patient hasn't objected, 1, and 2, providing that it's necessary for the treatment and the care of the patient, or if it's necessary for the administration of that institution or the professional practice, which is the instance that I'm talking about right now. Now, you've got to add to all of this medical information the fact that there is an obligation on you as doctors falling under the HPCSA to maintain doctor-patient confidentiality. And that is absolutely essential when we move into why the POPIA is so tremendously important. It's the confidentiality and it is the protection of that information that you are now the custodians of. Now, just for information, I'd like to just, for 2 minutes, just show you how wide personal information can actually go. So it goes from the mundane to the ridiculous. So it goes from email addresses, obviously, physical address, ID number, but then things like your medical history, sure, your financial history, a criminal record, your employment history, your sexual orientation, your physical or mental age. It's usually identifiable to living natural persons, but existing juristic persons can also and are also catered for in this act. We are talking about living natural persons. And then biometric data, personal opinions, etc. And the opinions specifically are guaranteed by this act. So any view or opinion of another individual about a person, that is absolutely personal information. So be very, very sure that personal information is understood by all of us around this webinar. And then expanded personal information too, as I said, can be assembled and utilized by insurance companies, medical schemes, administrators, etc. Again, provided that the data subject hasn't objected, and obviously they're not going to object because they want the scheme to pay the bills, or the performance of an insurance or medical scheme agreement that they've entered into, or enforcing any of the contractual rights and obligations of the schemes or the MCOs. So that gives you a kind of an overview of what is and are personal information categories. Now, confidentiality, privacy, and information, there's really nothing specifically new that I've said so far. This is all old hat. But there are specific things which you need to refocus on. And that is when you are gathering patient information, what are you gathering? Why are you gathering it? Where are you storing it? Who has access to it? And who can process it? And if you can answer all of those questions, then you are well on your way to understanding POPIA and understanding that a regulator will walk out with a smile on her face when she has come to inspect your practice. So let's talk security of the collected personal information. The Act repeatedly speaks about reasonability and reasonable measures. And what are they actually trying to say? They're trying to say this is not a Herculean task. You must do whatever you can possibly do within the bounds of what you are able to do, what you can afford, and what is appropriate to your practice. And you need to make sure that when you do all of that, you secure the information against loss, damage, unauthorized destruction, or unlawful access, and that's a huge problem, or unlawful processing of personal information. So, for those of you who have done occupational health, this will resonate. You need to identify all foreseeable internal and external risks, establish and maintain appropriate safeguards against those risks, regularly verify that the safeguards are effectively implemented, and then continually update those safeguards. So does this not sound to you like a risk assessment? I think, Morgs, you've got an occupational health degree. This is, in fact, a security risk assessment. This is what you should be doing. You should be going around your practice with an imaginary magnifying glass and saying, where can patient personal information come under scrutiny and where can it leak? Where are my weak spots? Identify those weak spots, mitigate those risks, and prevent those risks once you've done all of those. And then write it down in an implementation plan. And one of our forms will show you exactly how to do that. Now, the HPCSA has provided us with some very important booklets. Booklet 1 and Booklet 2. think they were last revised 2016, but they're very appropriate on those two booklets. Also, the ethical guidelines for patient confidentiality are absolutely essential when you're looking at the generally accepted information security and other measures. So refer to those guidelines on patient records, how to protect the patient records, and also on how electronic records should be password protected, etc. Even the telemedicine regulations, which are a little bit old and outdated, also will be referring to security of data and security of patient personal information. I suggest that what we try to do is to use a common sense approach. So, as I said, there's no tick charts. It's not the same for every one of your practices. There's no one size that fits all. But the common things. Don't let your antivirus expire. Don't use the cheapest form of antivirus, which is a free one, because all that you're going to do is you're going to get let down halfway. Make sure that your premises are locked, for example, that they're alarmed, and that your records are under lock and key. And hold that thought for a moment. I've had guys asking me, can't we just lock the front door? Yes, you can lock the front door. Of course you must lock the front door. Must you lock your filing cabinet? Yes, you must, as well. Do you have to have 10,000 volts of electricity surrounding your practice in electrified fencing? No, you don't. Do you have to have starved Rottweilers walking around the premises? No, you don't. You actually need to see what fits your practice, and then continuously assess your security measures and take the appropriate steps to update and upgrade them when you see that you're wanting. So again, from the sublime to the ridiculous, don't leave files lying on the tablets. This isn't rocket science. This is basically straightforward general knowledge. And how many times have doctors, dentists, physios, OTs, dietitians left a patient file just in enough line of sight for the next patient to see who it was? That's a breach of confidentiality. It's a breach of personal information. When you've done your risk assessment and you've actually gone around to your staff and explained to them all of the problems that may or may not be in your practice, you then need to make sure that any new appointees are taken through the same course again. And once a year, you need to sit down with your entire team. Make it fun. Buy them some cookies and cake, and sit down and ask some questions. What do you do to maintain security? What do you do? What is your job? What happens if A, B, C, D? And then document that you have had such a training course with your staff, because this is going to be looked for by the regulator. The staff need to sign after having been present on a training course. The staff also need to sign confidentiality agreements with you, that they will be absolutely resolute in the way that they handle health data. And there are disciplinary measures which will be taken for non-compliance. And then another one of my simple pearls: don't just send information to anyone. So probably the first is don't leave faults lying around. The second is saying to your staff, before you press the send button, for heaven's sake, look at the two and make sure that that is the right J. Jones. Let's forget about staff now. Let's forget about all the confidentiality. I've accepted now that you are on my wavelength there. And let's turn to the operators. These are guys who work for you, but not in your practice. So they contract with you. They do a job. So strange enough, it's your auditors, for example, or operators. It's the vans who actually move your data. It's the claims administrators. It's the bureaus. It's the companies providing file cloud storage. They are all doing a job for you. They're actually taking data, processing it. You are processing it as well. Very important. Let's hold our thought there. As soon as you fill in the form, which you'll find in your handout, you become a data processor as well. So don't think that it's only operators who process data. You are a data processor the minute that the patient tells you their medical aid number and you write it down. You are now a data processor too, but you're not an operator. Remember that although the operators who are working outside of your practice and doing an outside job under contract will do the best that they can, the Act holds you responsible for any breaches of personal information that the operator might cause and might be operating on behalf of yourself. So you will fall if the operator falls. And that's extremely important when I come to the indemnity that I advise you to get from every operator. Now, clearly, an operator must agree that they are only going to operate with your knowledge, with your authorization. They will treat personal information as it comes to their knowledge as confidential, never disclose it, etc., unless required by law. Simple, easy peasy. But this one's not so easy. You need to have a contract with your operators. And I've seen many of the operators have already sent out contracts, their contracts to you, in which they undertake a whole lot of things, 1 through 5. I haven't seen a single operator undertaking 6. And this is my advice to you, that they indemnify you against any claims, fines, and penalties flowing from any data breach where they themselves have not implemented Section 19 measures. We won't go through the Section 19 measures now, but you have a look at my number 3. They undertake to maintain reasonable security measures of its own as required by Section 19. They don't indemnify you if they don't. Okay. Now, the way that I structured my slides, at the bottom of each slide, or many slides, you will see some blue numbers and letters. They refer to the relevant sections of the Act if you want to read more about individual portions of the Act. But when you wake up tomorrow morning, go and have a look whether you've got an operator contract. If not, send the one which you will find in your handout, or send at least the details that are in your handout to them and ask them to please provide you with those details in the form of contract. That's for your own personal protection. Let's talk about data breaches. Heaven forbid, another Ashley Madison or another Life Care. They've all had data breaches. It's, in fact, no disgrace. It's almost unavoidable. However well prepared you are, you're going to have something that's going to happen. And I reckon that why don't we rather think in terms of a luxury cruise? If any of you do luxury cruising, you get your life jacket, it's in your cupboard, you've had a nice big hearty supper, and then the alarm bells go and they say, please go to your muster stations. We're going to be having a lifeboat drill. And you say, oh, for God's sake. Couldn't be bothered. Well, you could. This is a lifeboat drill. You will take the data breach exercise into your practice and conduct this like your lifeboat drill, because this will be your lifesaver. You need to minimize cost, minimize sanction, and minimize the damage to your reputation by understanding what you do when the pawpaw hits the fan. And that's the problem with the data breach. Everyone starts running in different directions. So you need a developed plan, which is easy to follow. Your staff need to be trained, like I did on the lifeboat training now, and you need to update it on a fairly regular basis. You'll find all of this again in your handout. The policy for you may be different to the policy for me, may be different to the one for Unben, may be different to the one for Morgan. But what's important is that each one of you have a written, dated, signed, stepwise approach to data breach. That it's easily understood and the policy is accessible by your staff. When I say policy, I'm not talking insurance policy. I'm talking about a series of actions that you will take, and it's a policy that you will follow. Clear, non-technical language explaining what security compromise is and its urgency. Identifying the people to whom the breach must be reported internally, which is you, because almost certainly you will be the information officer. Identifying in this melee of anything that's going wrong and alarm bells are going off, whose responsibility it is to inform the regulator. Because as you'll see in a couple of slides' time, you have to inform the regulator. You need to identify whose responsibility it is to notify the patients who are the data subjects who have been affected by this. And you need to specify how the patients will be notified. Are you going to tell them by SMS, by email? Are you going to tell them by publishing it on a website, putting it into a local newspaper? We'll go through all of those in a moment. We need to identify also who's responsible to ensure that the patient gets that notification. The person who is responsible to secure the rest of your data will be a different person to number 9. So they are telling patients in number 9 something's gone wrong, while number 10 is literally cosseting the practice and making sure that no further breaches are happening. Disconnecting yourself from the internet, switching off the power, etc. And you need to specify how to manage and assess a breach and implementation of your future preventative measures that you learn from that first and ghastly first breach. And then once you've done all of that, you've got 11 principles there. The 12th one is call for help. In fact, it should maybe be the first one. Give us a shot. Either us or your insurance company, doesn't matter. But don't do this one yourself. It's something that is bigger than any one of our practices are used to. So call for help. It can happen to any one of us at any stage. You see, you do have to let the regulator know. And as soon as you let the regulator know, then the whole thing is official. But you must be absolutely sure that you've protected your own data first. So the regulator in her law says, as soon as reasonably possible. And you'll notify the patient as well, as soon as reasonably possible. So what does this mean? Well, it means once you've taken into account the following. Firstly, you secure your system before you report to anybody. And then you take into account what you've got to do in terms of the law, the lease, because it could be that it has been a hack. You need to make sure that you take all the necessary measures to determine the scope. How wide is the breach? How many folders have gone? Has it been just A to E's? Has it been the whole alphabet? Has it been certain groups of patients? We don't know. We need to find out. And then what measures are necessary to restore the integrity of our information system? And outside of those delays, where you are just making sure that nothing worse goes wrong, you can't really delay. You can't delay in informing the regulator and the public at large. However, if the regulator says that you must not inform anyone further, then you may not, or any other agent of the police or specific organization. Because what they're saying is there may be a criminal investigation, and you might then adulterate a criminal investigation if you report at the wrong time. So you need direction. You need us or your insurance company to tell you what you should do. Now, when this has all happened, you need to write to the patient. And again, you will find a form like this in your handouts. You will mail to the data subject's last known physical or postal address. Now, that's a bit of a laugh because we don't have a postal service, but it's basically one of the suggestions or requirements. What we're suggesting is that you would use either SMS, email, or both. And if all of that fails, then you would put it in a prominent position on your website. But for heaven's sake, don't re-breach. So don't put a big notice saying, Tony Berman, your XYZ results have gone viral, and we just want to apologize to you. Make very, very sure that what you're going to put on a website has been screened and vetted by your indemnity company or your insurance company. Publish it in the news media, the same warning as in C. Or any other way that the regulator might decide that you should approach the subject. As I said, it's probably best to do more than one, and we're suggesting maybe SMS and email. Maybe publishing it on a website, but be careful of re-breaching. The notification, and again, this is in your handout, must provide enough information to allow the patient to take preventative and protective measures. So they must understand the consequences of a security compromise. They must understand the measures that you intend to take to address the security compromise. And you must make a recommendation to the patient how they can possibly mitigate the adverse effects of what's happened to them and their data. And then if it's known to you, you're expected to tell the data subject who has suffered this exposure the identity of the unauthorized person who may have accessed or acquired the personal information. So the standard notice, you'll see we have made copies of all of this, and you personalize these to your practice. But again, let us help you. These are the templates which you will populate, you will answer, you will describe, and you'll put into your POPIA folder. And when a regulator comes along, you've got a nice folder like this to say, here we go. This is all the things that I intend to do. Have you ever had a data breach? Thank heavens I haven't. But if I do, this is what I'll follow. They're going to say, that's what we want to see. Let's go back to the next doctor. Okay, let's move on now to the interfacing between the POPIA and the PIA. So the Protection of Personal Information, Act 4 of 2013, now interfaces with the Promotion of Access to Information, Act 2 of 2000. And as I mentioned to you, in 2013, many of us did PIA manuals because it was just the right thing to do, but you only had to do it if your turnover was more than, I think it was 15 million Rand a year. So I don't think many of us actually did, but if you did, well done. If you didn't, then at the very end from page 7 to page 15 of the handout is the template that you will use to show you the different categories that you will then plug into your POPIA folder, whereby you describe various things that you have in your practice and how you will handle them. It's just an aid manual. In terms of this POPIA folder, it's going to have the name of your information officer. And again, I repeat, almost certainly you. Now, in a busy practice, you might decide that you want to nominate a deputy information officer. If that's the case, you can. But remember that the deputy information officer is not liable to the regulator. You are. So anything that he or she does wrong, you cannot blame the deputy. The buck stops with you in this act. Very clear. Very similar to the occupational health and safety. And then obviously you put the name and the details for your specific regulator. And here there is a warning. And you can see I've actually written right across the slide because we were telling everybody to register with the regulator. And you had to do that before the 1st of July, 2021. Now, you all probably know that their website fell over and that they are and were unable to receive any further registrations. Now, some of you succeeded and some of you got a certificate, and well done. You did it early. But many of you waited until the last 12 hours and over the website went, and apparently it's still over. What I'm suggesting is that you keep looking at the information regulator website and see when this comes back up. But at the moment, there is no penalty if you have not registered with the information regulator as an information officer, because up to now, they have not been able to receive it. I'm just getting a WhatsApp coming in. I'm just going to see if it's in connection with the talk. No. Right. So we've dealt with the information officer. We've told you now that it has not been postponed. You still have to do all the things I'm telling you about in the folder. You just don't have to register with the information officer. Now, there was a pesky rumor that was going around that the whole thing has been postponed and suspended until the 1st of February 2022. Wrong. It is not. It's only 2 clauses, 57 and 58, neither of which have anything to do with us on this talk tonight. They're interesting, but I would prefer that you channel your energy into getting your POPIA folder up and ready, which is all that you have to do. Don't get involved in encryptions and WhatsApps, and if you can use WhatsApps and can't use WhatsApp, just get all of the compliance stuff ready. There's plenty other time to occupy our minds. But we've got COVID that we're busy with at the moment. This is just a flipping irritation. We need to do it, and we need to do it fairly regularly, fairly easily, and get it behind us. Don't let it get bigger than it really is. You need in your POPIA folder to indicate the purpose for which you are processing information. Clear. I mean, I'm processing information because I'm a doctor. The information I'm processing is healthcare information. And you can describe some of the stuff that you do. The categories of data subjects, well, these are patients and their families, etc. The type of personal information, you can basically make all of this up to fit your practice. You might be an aesthetic practice. You might be an occupational health practice. Just put it all in there. Again, no rocket science here. You need to say who your information is going to be handed to in terms of the operators and what security measures you have in place in your practice. And I respect all the information that you've been given in the past. You've just been bowled over with a tsunami of information, which is not all 100% necessary right now. So what we're doing, and we're nearly finished, is to give you sufficient information to make sure that your folder will be up to date. You understand why you've done it, you've personalized it to your practice, and you're away. Now, this is quite important. You also need to make quite clear whether or not personal information will be moved outside of South Africa. So most of the organizations in South Africa are in fact storing your information outside of South Africa. And you need to ask your cloud storage people, are they doing so? Now, most of the big cloud storage individuals are storing in companies which are governed by the General Data Protection Regulations of the UK or Europe, or unlikely, but highly possible, the Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the HIPAA Act of America. If you are using an operator or a storage organization, which is one of those El Cheapos, then you might find that it's being housed in Bolivia or Transylvania. And at that stage, you might well find that your data is being sold into the dark web. So make sure that your operators actually give you, and your storage companies specifically, give you a very clear letter indicating that they are compliant with GDPR or with HIPAA. Or obviously, if it is stored entirely in this country, then certainly with POPIA. POPIA is a slightly watered down version of the GDPR and rather very different to the HIPAA regulations. And then finally, on the PIA regulator website, which at the moment is being rejigged at the moment, because under the HRC, there are forms for patients to access their records, to make corrections or deletions of that record. And in terms of PIA, the Promotion of Access to Information Act, I'll just spend a minute on that, because patients are entitled to copies of their records. There's no question about that. They are expected, however, to complete the relevant request form. And on that request form, they are expected to indicate what human right it is that they want to protect by obtaining their records. They can also instruct you to change your records if there are any fundamental errors in their surname or their name or their address. What they cannot tell you to change is any of your findings. That is not part of the deal. They're entitled to ask you to delete if there are individuals who are no longer part of a scheme, for example. But they cannot ask you to delete their HIV status, for example. That's part of what you do, and you cannot be interfered with scientifically. So, as you construct this POPIA folder, I'll quickly whiz through all of the documentation which you've got in your handouts. But you've got something on security. What personal information is stored, how are you processing it, where is it stored, who has access to it, what reasonable practical steps can you take to secure the information. You've got a consent form. Now the consent form that I've put in is one which I've modified further in that it's a take-on form of your patient where they agree to a whole lot of conditions, and there is a POPIA clause that is in section 9. You are free to change it, you're free to adopt it, you're free to throw it away. But I think that what I put together on that is absolutely perfect for the average practice, and most of our practices done in Qualicare are using that form. This is the undertaking between you and your staff, so that they sign and date, and this is stored in your POPIA folder and in their staff folder, that they maintain strict confidentiality and that they only process information as and when it's necessary, and that they comply with your policies. Absolutely essential that every member of staff signs this undertaking. And then for your staff training, you need to complete this. You need to write a little essay saying what constitutes PI for your patients, what security measures you've adopted in your practice, what the staff's role in implementing and maintaining those security measures, and to whom they can and cannot disclose personal information. Now, let's stop there for a moment. I've heard huge amounts of rubbish from specialist secretaries indicating that they now can no longer share with you the specialist's report. That's wrong. If the specialist and the doctor are in the same multidisciplinary team, and the patient is happy that you've referred them to the specialist is referring them back to the doctor, there is nothing that stops you from sharing that information with the physio, the dietitian, the occupational therapist, and with the family practitioner. So let's not take this to its illogical conclusion. That's a nonsense story. You need your staff to understand what they should do if they're suspecting a data breach. And if it's a suspected data breach, it is a data breach. They need to come to you immediately. They need to report to the head of the practice straight away. You are the one that decides whether it is a data breach. And then the records of all your training and signatures that they were part of that training. The data breach response document, I've gone through with you in detail. You'll see all of the different A, B, C, D, E, F, Gs there for you. Make your own document using our headings. These are suggestions for you. These are not legal documents. Important, you can use them or you can trash them. But I believe that this will help you tremendously in satisfying an inspection. Your contract with your service providers, which is basically your operators, I've gone through that, and please have a look at number 5 in this one. It was number 6 in the previous one, and indemnity in your favor against claims, fines, and penalties flowing from data breaches where they have not implemented the appropriate Section 19 security measures. Most important. That is a more legal wording for the document, which again you can use or not use, but it is in your handout as well. Here's just a reminder again about the incorporation of your PIA details into your POPIA folder. Remember, the PIA manual is now no longer. We are expecting that there may be a revision of the criteria for a PIA manual round about December 2021, but we're not sure. So we're using the old template. Nothing wrong with the old template. A lot of it, however, you will see when you read it, is totally out of date. A lot of the pricing that you're entitled to charge when you issue records is off the wall. Now, let me stop there for a moment and just explain to you that when a patient regularly requests records, you can't suck out of your thumb how much you're going to charge them. It is all legislated. And the legislation is 30 Rand to actually do the photocopy per hour, 50 Rand to open a folder, and 1 Rand 35 or 1 Rand 10, somewhere around there, for each A4 photocopy. And then there are various different permutations for stiffy disks and floppy disks, etc. Because when these were written, there actually were no USB. So take those with a pinch of salt. But if a patient asks you for records and they use the correct form, they're entitled to their records. Please don't tell them it'll cost you 2,500 Rand because you're wasting my time, and it's going to be that money up front. You are constrained to that 30 Rand an hour and 50 Rand to open the folder. These are all the things which I've told you would go into your POPIA folder. I won't go through them all again because this is just repetition. This is my final slide. So as we close, I'm saying only use patient information for the purpose that it was collected. Now, I was called this morning by somebody from a cell phone company who I happen to have a contract with. And they're asking me, did I want to upgrade? I got quite cross with them, but they are entitled to do that because I'm an existing client and they're offering me further service. If the call came in from a company that I was not contracted to, I could report that to the information regulator because they got my details illicitly. So our patient information that we are using is only for the purpose that we are collecting, which is for medical aid billings. And then if you look at my form carefully, the take-on form, we allow you to use that information for debt collection. Without the patient agreeing, you may not use that for debt collection. You need to explain to the patient why you are asking for that information, if you're going to use it for debt collection as well. Your next of kin information. If you are going to use it just to call in the event of a medical emergency, that's fine. But if you cross the line and you use NOK information to contact somebody because John Soap didn't pay his bill and you are the next of kin, you are abusing the information that you collected that NOK information. So look at the form that I've given you. It's been very, very carefully thought out. Train your staff. I've mentioned that to you ad nauseum. Ensure that the operators are POPIA compliant and obtain a written consent from everyone, new as well as returning patients. Now, this will be my last comment, and this is, it's a pain in your side. What you don't have to do is you don't have to do this all at once. So as a new patient comes in, you can get them to sign up. As a repeat patient comes in, you can get them to sign up. But remember that POPIA also talks about how long you can maintain the data. So let's talk about that just for a moment. It's not in my talk, but I think it's important that I clarify this. The HPCSA says that you need to keep data for at least 6 years from the last viable transaction in adults. In children, you need to keep them until that child becomes a major at 21. And you must make quite sure that at that stage, you are entitled, if there was no activity for the past 6 years, then you can destroy. But from the age of 18, when they reach a form of maturity, they've still got 3 years for which they can sue. So up to 21, and then you can destroy. Mentally incapacitated patients, you can never destroy. Various COIDA things can last as long as 10 or 40 years, depending on which branch of COIDA it is. So be very, very careful that you don't destroy too soon. Now, POPIA looks at it from a different point of view. They say you may not know for longer than 6 years, or 21 years, or 40 years, etc. But there's middle ground. And that middle ground is if you can validly explain why you need to hold on to that data. For example, somebody's got a VP shunt. Somebody's got a pacemaker, which has been put in some time ago and they haven't come back for a retweak. Somebody's had extensive abdominal bypass surgery. And you need the records of what was actually done. That's an absolutely valid reason to keep those records for longer than the 6 years. So my message here is, so long as you can justify why you're keeping the records, that's fine. If you can't, then you mustn't. So start getting rid of the cash patients who came in once, who've filled out a folder and haven't ever come back again. Then the holiday patients who have come in once, and you might be lucky if you see them in 3 years' time again. That's all entitled to go after 6 years if there's no activity. And then slowly you work through your current patients and then your new patients as well. So make sure it's a run up and run down. And the last is, as you destroy information, make sure that you destroy it correctly. So if you're going to do it in your practice, you can't tear it up. You'll all get arthritis of your hands. So invest in a high-powered cross-cutter shredder. Don't use the ones with the long strips, because if you've seen some of the cyber movies, they put them together on the rubbish dumps and they find out all the information again. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. Get a cross-cutter, a whole lot better. Better than that is engage the services of a professional company who will take away your old, give you a certificate of destruction, and pulp it. So colleagues, we're coming up for 8 o'clock. I've spoken a little bit longer than I thought I was initially going to, but I think we've covered a huge amount of ground. I'm going to hand back to Anben as our CEO and chair, and to Morgan as our chairman, and to say if there are any questions, I'm quite happy to try and answer. I've got about 15 minutes and then I'm going to have to leave. But over to you. I hope that you found it simple, relatively easy to understand. I hope I've taken away a lot of the cobwebs of fear that surrounded this unnecessary overload of data that many of the big attorney firms have given you. And good luck. Do this over the next couple of weekends, and I guess you'll be fine. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to go back to our chair.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for an excellent talk and for making it a lot more practical than before. I think I like your term, tsunami of information. I think this simplifies it for us, and for most of the practices, I think the important thing is to work through the handbook. I think the minute you start it and you start getting, when you look at all this information from without getting to, it looks daunting. And I think the quicker we start trying to do the checklist, the quicker we'll get through it, and then we'll understand what we need to do in the practice. Just a few points from the chat. I think most people who have put their email down for their handbook, Petra has started sending those out already. So hopefully you would have received the handbooks by now. A lot of people have requested a recording of this. What we will do is we'll keep a track of all the emails, and we'll then send out a notice in terms of once we've uploaded it and how to access it, as well as Tony, we've had requests for copies of the slides as well.
Sure.
There has been some questions. I think I'll go to the chat, and I see Jeff, your hand up as well. I'll come to you in a few minutes. Matthew has said, excellent talk. Could you please advise on life insurance companies requesting patient information in their risk and claims assessments? Can we share this information? So can we share information with life insurance companies requesting information?
This is a very interesting one, because we had a real case just a couple of days ago where an individual was sent in for a medical, and the medical wasn't very favorable, and it went into the life insurance company, and the individual phoned back to the doctor and said, how dare you send that into the life insurance company that was supposed to go back to my broker? Now, this opens up a whole can of worms, because we've all done insurance medicals, and invariably an insurance medical is supposed to be put into a sealed envelope. And I know I have often given it to the broker who says, I will take it into the insurance company. But what apparently has been happening is that the brokers are opening your information and assessing whether or not the patient got a good examination or not. And if it was a flawless examination, they then transport that on to the life insurance company. And if it wasn't, they say to the patient, oh, let me take you to another doctor. They will give them something for diabetes, give them something as a beta blocker, etc., for hypertension, and have them redone with the second doctor's total ignorance. So from a life insurance point of view, your contract that you have with the life insurance company is your terms and conditions. When you agree with a life insurance company that you can be seen by the doctor and that the doctor can send it directly into the life insurance company, that is a watertight contract. It doesn't indicate that you should give it to the broker. And my word on this one is a word of warning to everyone. Don't give life insurance forms to brokers. It's fundamentally unsafe because of what we've just heard can happen. If the life insurance company then decides that they want further information, etc., again, there is a form that the patient has got to sign to say, yes, I will now go for a respiratory questionnaire, a GIT questionnaire, a neurological questionnaire. It's all done with the patient's consent. If you don't have the patient's consent, you don't do it. I hope I've answered the question if I've got the right tack. Otherwise, please correct me and I'll try again.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to ask Jeff to ask his question. Jeff, please go ahead. Jeff, you're on mute. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me?
Thanks, Jeff. We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Tony, for excellent talk and for dumbing it down for all of us. Tony, in our practices, we communicate with our staff via WhatsApp and email and SMS. For example, we get an SMS to say patients COVID positive or COVID negative from the lab. And are we allowed to copy and paste that in WhatsApp to the staff so that they can immediately contact the patient? Is that wrong? Then obviously that information is then on their cell phones. And then some of our staff members are able to access their emails relating to the practice on their cell phones, which help because it helps with communication and efficiency. Are they allowed to have practice and business related emails on their cell phones, or are we supposed to actually delete that from the cell phones and only operate via computers? And are you aware of any other precautions that we need to take in terms of emails and general communications relating to patient information? Also, a staff member is allowed to call the patient and say, your blood results are normal.
Thank you, Jeff. Tony?
Tony?
Tony, you're on mute, sorry.
Tony, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry. Let's go through those one by one, Jeff. I've got initially, well, let's talk about the WhatsApp, which is quite contentious at the moment. There's nothing in the Act which actually indicates that you have to encrypt anything at the moment. It hasn't been covered in the Act. What we're saying is the ability of the data and where it's stored is the worry with a lot of this information. And what we have been told is that WhatsApp, although it's end-to-end encrypted, is stored all over the place, but it's stored in such a way that you can only put it together almost using blockchain. So I don't know if it's true. I am absolutely not an expert in any of this, but providing that your patients have given you consent to receive and transmit information to and from them, I would think that an appointment, yes, you can do that. A contentious blood result, no, I don't think you should be sending that on WhatsApp. I would prefer that that goes to a dedicated email address, but that's just my personal feeling. It has never been ruled on, Jeff. This act is as young as a month. So none of this has gone to court. And much of what will be decided by courts or will be on the interpretation of the regulations. But the feeling has been that if you are going to be transmitting either life-threatening results, contentious results, results which could result in suicide, etc., where there may be an error that has come through, it is far better to either do those face-to-face or on a dedicated email.
Thank you, Tony.
There were some other questions that Jeff had. Jeff, would you like to elucidate the others? Jeff?
So I think some of the questions was around emails about staff having their own
yes,
cell phones, having work-related
yeah. So again, there is no law about that. But as far as the security breach is concerned, what we've discussed quite widely is that the staff should have 2 different cell phones, one for work and one for pleasure. And if you're going to be using their cell phones, and look, this is theoretical. So I know that it's very difficult to have 2 different cell phones. I've had 2 cell phones, and sometimes I've lost both on the same day. So it's difficult, but in essence, your work should not be on a cell phone which can then be picked up by the children of that mom or dad and accessed. And if that happens, I think that the regulator would rightfully come down very, very hard on the information officer, which is the doctor.
And then may I just go further regarding COVID results? You know, when the result is positive, our local municipality has requested us to forward those results on to them, the Department of Health, to enable them to rapidly do a house visit, track and trace. Is that permissible? Or do we need to include that in our privacy statement?
No. From the Department of Health side, if you are uploading results to the DOH on a cell phone in a pandemic, again, none of this has been taken to a court. But from a reasonable man point of view, you're sending positive results into the department to try and curtail a national pandemic. It would be seen as a mitigating reason. If it was on a cell phone which was being shared by somebody else whose kid was playing Candy Crush, that's a different matter, and that needs to be changed.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Tony. Tony, just a question in the chat from Prashini. Do you need to continue putting diagnosis on the medical certificate?
Yes.
Or just indicate physical, psychological illness, or even on a prescription, an ICD-10 code or a description?
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of that depends on the requirements of the medical aid, but on a prescription itself, you can put confidential. And on a sick certificate, you can put confidential as well. Your difficulty comes in with the funders who want more and more and more information. Now, from a sick certificate point of view, you've got an intermediary, which is not the funder, it's the employer. And what we have put at the bottom of our certificates is that the patient signs that they understand the contents of the sick certificate, 1, 2, that they agree with the contents of the certificate, and 3, that it may be released to their employer. They sign yes or no for each one of those, and then we keep a carbonated copy, and the patient gets a carbonated copy. If the employer asks for a certificate, we never send the certificate from our practice. The patient is entitled and encouraged to take that certificate in to the employer. If the employer wants any further information, we refer them to the patient, and we ask them to please bring a note from the patient to say, may we discuss this further? So it's a situation which has been abused by both sides at the moment, both by the employer and the employees, taking too much sick leave and being too paternalistic and wanting to find out more and more information which is not necessarily a part of your job. So I think the easiest is to go to your T's and C's in your practice to make sure that your patients sign a prescription or a sick certificate, sorry, not sign a prescription, a sick certificate with this may be released to my employer, yes or no, I understand the certificate and I agree with the diagnosis. And I can give you a copy of the one that we use if you want.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to do one more question from the chat, and then I think we're going to wrap it up for the evening. I think it's Bianca. Who can register as an information officer? Does it have to be the owner of the practice, i.e. the doctor, or can he or she appoint one of their staff to be an IO? Can a practice have more than one IO?
So the second part of your answer is you can have more than one IO. You can have a deputy IO, but the IO themselves has to be the person who is the owner and operator of the business. So that would be in a partnership, it would be a senior partner. In a incorporation, it would be the person who is either at the top of the incorporation or in a association, it would be each one of the associates would be his own information officer. It's very much like a chief executive officer of a company. So you have, in occupational health, you have what they call a 16-2 appointee, who basically is responsible for all of the occupational health, but the guy who stands or falls is the chief executive, not the 16-2. And in that instance, you are the chief executive and you have to be the information officer.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. I do see there's other questions in the chat box. I think what we will do is we'll try to collate the questions and see if we can send answers to them. We'll forward it on to you as well, Tony, so that you can see if we can create a frequent, common asked questions as well.
Yeah, in fact, I've got one here which we can actually add to as well. Anbin, if I just mentioned to you, I see that there were requests for the actual slides. From an MPS point of view, those slides are all proprietary and they aren't released, but certainly the stuff which I've sent in the form of the documentation, that is freely available. What you may do is you can look at Prism if you are an MPS member, go on to Prism. Much of my talk, and in fact a more detailed talk, is actually to be found on Prism. So this recording will be made as well, but you can also go to Prism and there's a 45-minute talk with lots of questions as well.
Thanks, Tony. Just follow up on that. I think one of the questions was around the handout, whether these are only for MPS members or should the logos be left on, or can we adapt these?
You know, anyone can use them. MPS has basically mandated me to put them together, which I've done. And the talk tonight was not only for MPS members, it wasn't only for IPAF members, it was for any and every general practitioner who by now has not had an easy to understand talk on POPIA. So it's for everybody. It's totally altruistic. It's agnostic of MPS. MPS's logo happens to be on them because it was done under the auspices, but no, you don't have to be part of MPS to use those.
Fantastic. I think on that note, we've got just a minute left before 1:15. And colleagues, thank you very much. I think it was an excellent talk. I know that we've got some questions still. I do think that we're going to have to set up another session again on this. I see a lot more questions coming to fold. And, you know, I think that these talks from IPAF, you know, will be hopefully continuing on a regular basis, and will continue communicating with us. Tony, thank you very much for an excellent talk. And colleagues, on that note, I'm going to say good night. Please can I ask the IPAF directors to stay on for a few minutes after the rest of the colleagues leave. Thank you very much, colleagues, and good night.
Good night, and it was a pleasure.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That was very interesting. Tony, just while we just waiting for Anbin to give us more instructions and orders and all the other stuff, you mentioned this issue around copies, which you didn't include in your talk. It's been a major bone of contention. And I've been I didn't even think about asking you ever about it. But
Yeah.
where do we find that particular piece of information on those rates? And secondly, who does the updates on those rates? Because that used to previously be done by SAMA, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, look, you're talking about the rates for copying and
Yes.
yes. The rates are actually prescribed in law, so it's actually part of the old PIA. It's one of the schedules on PIA, and you've got a handout now from us. You go to the page 7, 8, 9, 10 through to 15, and you'll see it's crazy stuff. Where for a stiffy disk, for a floppy disk, for a completely crazy bloody stuff, and to open a folder for 50 Rand and to work at 30 Rand an hour to make photocopies, and 1 Rand 10 a page is from, well, I don't know.
So Tony, it's Mukesh here. Sorry to butt in. You know who's used this to their advantage? The malpractice attorneys. They've picked this up, and instead of paying a lot of money now to get patient records, they use that act, and they pay you only according to that fee.
That's right, and those fees when PIA was documented, it was 2,000. Those fees in 2000 were shabby. But I mean, for now, they are an insult. But we have had specialists who've been disciplined by the HPCSA for saying, yes, you can have it. Just drop 2,000 Rand off with the secretary and you can get all of the stuff. And you can imagine how many copies you're going to make for 2,000 Rand at 1 Rand 10 shop.
Yeah, no. Thanks very much, Tony. No, I appreciate that. Certainly, we'll brush that up in our system, because it's been something that we haven't really. For some reason, I don't know why nobody mentioned to me it was in POPIA. I mean, in PIA. I'll get that sorted out.
Yeah. But we're hoping for a new PIA manual. It's been promised supposedly when POPIA went live, and PIA moved from the Human Resources Council to the Information Regulator, because PIA now should fall under the Information Regulator, and they just haven't done the updates.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Sorry, Anban, I grabbed the microphone there.
Well, actually, we were hoping to. I think there's still a lot of people on, so. Just a reminder that tomorrow we're not having the operational meeting in the morning, and we have our stretch session on Saturday from 3:30.
Perfect.
No problems. And then, Morgs, are you still on? Have we cancelled with Lee?
Now, I asked him to try and reschedule the meeting for 8 o'clock.